Okay, welcome to Ready Lesson 11 for 8th grade. This is part 2. So we are working on analyzing word choice. So now let's go ahead and read this historical account, the Trans-Pacific Passage toward the Gold Field. The rush of hopeful young men across North America, the North American continent in 1849 is a well-documented phenomenon in American history. Pursuing their dreams of discovering gold, the so-called 49ers charged into the gold fields of California, ballooning the population in unprecedented ways. The pre-gold rush population in California, still just a territory, was 14,000. Historians generally agree that 2 years later the population had reached 100,000. Just 2 years after that, it had more than doubled again. Each man no doubt hoped or erroneously assumed that he would have the Midas touch and that everything he laid a finger on would turn to gold. It wasn't just young Americans who participated in this flood of prospectors. Through a thriving trade relationship with the United States, the Chinese heard news of the gold discovery. Economic difficulties in China and some political unrest made the possibility of travel and opportunity quite appealing. By 1851, 25,000 Chinese immigrants had paid passage to California. Ocean travel in 1850 was a hardship for anyone, but for working class passengers, the conditions on a crowded ship were almost unthinkable. One account, based on an American ship captain's first-hand notes, relates that the poor people were herded in the hold of the ship like a flock of sheep with no sanitation. The passengers were allowed on deck. The passengers were allowed on deck in small groups, but only when the weather was fair. Otherwise, they spent much of the voyage penned in the utter darkness of the hold. We can only guess at the mortality rate. Sorry about that. We can only guess at the mortality rates of these Chinese immigrants who, like their American counterparts, were traveling thousands of miles lured by the promise of gold. So let's go ahead and do the close reading. They want us to circle the illusion that the author makes in the first paragraph. If you notice, in the first paragraph, they do refer to the Midas touch. So that is our illusion in the first paragraph. Next, they want us to draw a box around the analogy in paragraph 3. So when they refer to the Chinese passengers as being like a flock of sheep, that is, or herded like a flock of sheep, that is our analogy right there. So now let's go ahead and go to the questions. So number 1 says, reread the second sentence in paragraph 1. Sorry about that. Reread the second sentence in paragraph 1. What effect do the word choices have on the meaning and tone of this paragraph? So going back to the second sentence of paragraph 1, it says that pursuing their dreams of discovering gold, the so-called 49ers charged into the gold fields of California, ballooning the population in unprecedented ways. So they charged in there and they ballooned in unprecedented ways. So A says the phrase charged into has negative connotations and suggests that the 49ers were reckless and angry. That's not quite true. B says the term charged and ballooning convey the idea of sudden and dramatic movement or growth. This does make more sense. C says the use of ballooning gives the idea that the growth was somehow fragile and prone to break suddenly or easy. Not really. D says the word unprecedented conveys the author's attitude that this event is not well understood. So by process of elimination, I can assume that B would be my best answer choice. And the reason being is because the phrase charged is not used to suggest the 49ers were reckless. In C, the word ballooning does give the idea of growth, but it does not suggest the idea of breaking easily in this context. D is incorrect because the word unprecedented. Sorry about that. D is incorrect because the word unprecedented indicates that this event never happened before, and that it also isn't well understood. So this leads me to B. So the word choice suggests a sudden movement or growth, so that's why B would be the best answer choice. So go ahead and circle B. Moving on, number 2 says, what impact does the allusion to Midas have on the meaning and tone of paragraph 1? A says the allusion implies that the author believes the men foolishly pinned their hopes on made-up stories. B says the allusion indicates that the men were unprepared for the hard work and brute labor involved in finding gold. C says the allusion makes it clear that each man was guaranteed to end up richer and more profitable than he had ever dreamed he would be. And D says the allusion gives the paragraph a bittersweet feeling. The men hoped to become rich, but tragedy was a possibility as well. By process of elimination, looking at A. A is incorrect because the story of Midas doesn't suggest foolishness. B is incorrect because the story of Midas doesn't suggest being unprepared. And C is incorrect because Midas may have ended up richer, but this does not describe the illusion's impact. So this leads us with D. The allusion to Midas does give a bittersweet tone because the story involves both happiness, turning things to gold, and sadness, even turning food to gold. So D would be our best answer choice. And then finally, number 3, it says examine the analogy in paragraph 3. Explain how the analogy helps you understand the conditions the people traveled in, as well as how it supports the author's tone. So the analogy compared the Chinese passengers to a flock of sheep. So let's go ahead and start typing that in. So the analogy compares the Chinese people to a flock of sheep as they are herded into the hold of the ship and sorry about that again, and penned in darkness. The analogy makes the people seem helpless and suggests sympathy for the passengers, adding to the compassionate tone. So go ahead and write that in. And then when you're done with that, you can go ahead and move on to part 5, the independent practice, Dust Bowl migrants. And hopefully now you understand analyzing word choice a little bit better.